Elizabeth had mastered the art of being invisible. For 7 years she'd kept her head down, served coffee with a smile, and never asked questions. But invisibility only works until someone starts looking. The morning shift at Rosie's Diner always started the same way. Elizabeth Torres arrived at 5:30, 30 minutes before opening, when the streets of Millbrook were still painted in shades of gray, and the only sound was the distant rumble of delivery trucks. She liked these quiet moments, the calm before the storm of breakfast orders, demanding customers, and the constant ballet of balancing plates and refilling coffee cups. She unlocked the glass door, the small bell chiming above her head, and flipped on the lights. The fluorescent bulbs flickered to life, casting their sterile glow over the red vinyl booths and checkered floor. Everything smelled like bacon grease and industrial cleaning solution, a combination that should have been unpleasant but had become oddly comforting over the years. Elizabeth tied her apron around her waist and began the opening routine. Start the coffee, check the register, wipe down the counters, set out the menus. Each movement was automatic, practiced, a meditation that kept her mind from wandering to places she'd spent 7 years trying to avoid. She was arranging the sugar packets when she heard the knock. Her hands froze. Nobody knocked at Rosie's at 5:45 in the morning. The diner didn't open until 6, and regular customers knew better than to expect early service. Slowly, Elizabeth turned toward the door. A man stood outside, his face partially obscured by the reflection of the streetlight on the glass. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket despite the mild September weather. He knocked again, more insistently this time. Elizabeth's heart rate quickened. She recognized the type. She'd seen enough of them over the years. The way he stood, the patient expectation in his posture, the expensive watch glinting on his wrist even in the dim light. This wasn't a lost tourist or an eager breakfast enthusiast. This was one of them. She approached the door slowly, her mind already calculating exits and excuses. "We're not open yet," she called through the glass, pointing at the hours posted on the door. The man smiled, not warmly, but with a practiced politeness that didn't reach his eyes. "I know, but I was hoping you might make an exception. Just a coffee. I've been driving all night." Every instinct told Elizabeth to refuse, to keep the door locked, to maintain the barrier between her carefully constructed world and the one she'd left behind. But refusing could be worse. These men didn't like being told no, and drawing attention to yourself by being difficult was more dangerous than serving a single cup of coffee. She unlocked the door. "Just coffee," she said firmly. "We don't start cooking until 6. "Coffee's perfect," the man said, stepping inside. Up close, he was younger than she'd initially thought, maybe 35, with sharp features and dark eyes that seemed to catalog everything in a single sweep. He chose a booth near the window, the kind of seat that offered a view of both the street and the entire interior of the diner. Elizabeth poured the coffee with steady hands, a skill she'd perfected over countless interactions like this one. Never let them see you're nervous. Never give them anything to remember you by. "You work here long?" the man asked, wrapping his hands around the mug. "A few years," Elizabeth replied, keeping her answer vague. She'd actually been at Rosie's for 6 years, but specifics were dangerous. "Good place," he said, looking around. "Neighborhood seems tight-knit." There it was, the real reason for the early visit, the probing question disguised as small talk. Elizabeth had heard variations of this conversation before. The neighborhood was tight-knit because it was controlled. Millbrook was a small industrial town about 40 minutes outside Newark, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and the local family kept things running smoothly, for a price. "It's quiet," Elizabeth said neutrally. "People mind their business." The man smiled again, this time with what might have been genuine amusement. "Smart lady. I'm Marco, by the way. I'll probably be around more often. Business in the area." "Elizabeth," she said, immediately regretting giving her real name. But refusing would have been stranger. Marco nodded, sipped his coffee, and left a $20 bill on the table for a $3 cup of coffee. "Keep the change. See you around, Elizabeth." After he left, Elizabeth stood motionless for a full minute, watching his car pull away. A black sedan with tinted windows, exactly what she'd expected. Then she carefully picked up the 20, put it in the register, and forced herself to continue the opening routine. Don't panic. Don't overreact. This doesn't mean anything, but the mantra felt hollow. In her experience, nothing ever meant nothing. Not in this world. By 7 o'clock, Rosie's Diner was in full swing. The breakfast crowd filled nearly every booth, Contractors grabbing eggs before heading to job sites, elderly regulars who came for the senior discount in the company, high school students loading up on pancakes before first period. Elizabeth moved through the chaos with practiced efficiency, her mind operating on two levels. The surface level handled orders and small talk, remembered who wanted their eggs scrambled and who took their coffee black. But underneath, a deeper part of her consciousness was running constant calculations, analyzing potential threats, planning contingencies. It was exhausting. It had been exhausting for 7 years. "Mom!" Elizabeth turned to see Tommy pushing through the diner's front door, his backpack bouncing against his small shoulders. At 7 years old, he was all energy and enthusiasm, his dark hair perpetually messy no matter how many times she combed it. His eyes, those distinctive gray-green eyes, always bright with curiosity. "Hey, baby," Elizabeth said, her entire demeanor softening. "You're early. Mrs. Chen drop you off?" "Yeah, she had an appointment," Tommy said, climbing onto a stool at the counter. "Can I have chocolate chip pancakes?" "You can have regular pancakes with a few chocolate chips," Elizabeth negotiated, already reaching for the batter. "And a glass of milk." Tommy made a show of sighing dramatically but nodded agreement. This was their routine. 3 days a week, their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, watched Tommy in the early mornings before school and dropped him at the diner around 7:30. He'd eat breakfast, do some homework or drawing at the counter, and Elizabeth would walk him to the elementary school 2 blocks away before the 8:30 bell. It wasn't ideal. What 7-year-old should have to start their day at a diner counter? But it was what they could afford, and Mrs. Chen charged almost nothing for the early morning care. Elizabeth's salary at Rosie's barely covered their tiny apartment, utilities, and food. There was no room for proper childcare, no savings for emergencies, no buffer against disaster. But they managed. They survived. And most importantly, they stayed invisible. "Did you finish your homework?" Elizabeth asked, sliding the pancakes in front of Tommy. "Most of it. I just have to color the picture for art class." "What picture?" Tommy pulled a piece of construction paper from his backpack, slightly crumpled but carefully rendered in colored pencil. Elizabeth's heart stopped. The drawing showed 3 figures. A woman, clearly Elizabeth, with her long dark hair, a small boy, Tommy himself, and a man. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing what looked like a suit. His face was drawn with more detail than a typical 7-year-old's stick figure. Strong jawline, dark hair, intense eyes. "That's us," Tommy explained through a mouthful of pancakes. "Mrs. Patterson said we should draw our family, but I don't have a dad, so I drew what I think he might look like." Elizabeth's throat constricted. "Baby, why did you draw him like that?" Tommy shrugged, the gesture heartbreakingly casual. "I saw a man at the window yesterday when Mrs. Chen was bringing me here. He was watching the diner. He looked, I don't know, important. And he kinda looked like me, I think. Same eyes." The diner sounds faded to a distant buzz. Elizabeth forced herself to breathe normally, to not let the panic show on her face. "What man, Tommy? Can you describe him better?" "Just a man. In a nice car. Black car." Tommy returned to his pancakes, already losing interest in the conversation in the way children do, moving from one thought to the next like a butterfly. But Elizabeth couldn't let it go. "Did he say anything to you? Did he try to talk to you?" "No, Mom. He was just there. Then Mrs. Chen said we had to go and he drove away." Tommy looked up, sensing her tension. "Is something wrong?" Elizabeth forced a smile. "No, sweetheart. Nothing's wrong. Just, you know I don't like strangers watching you, that's all. If you ever see someone watching you or following you, you tell me right away, okay? Or tell Mrs. Chen or a teacher." "Okay." Tommy agreed easily, then held up his drawing. "So can I hand this in? Mrs. Patterson says we need to turn in our family pictures today." Every fiber of Elizabeth's being wanted to take that picture and tear it into pieces, but that would alarm Tommy, and she couldn't afford to transfer her fear to him. Children needed to feel safe, even when the world wasn't safe at all. "It's a beautiful drawing," she said carefully, "but maybe we could draw a different version, just you and me. That's our family, right?" Tommy's face fell. "But everyone else has dads in their pictures. Jimmy has a dad, and Carlos. And Sarah has a dad and a stepdad. I just wanted to show what mine might be like." The guilt was immediate and crushing. Elizabeth crouched down to Tommy's eye level, taking his small hands in hers. "Listen to me, baby. You are the most important person in the world to me. Everything I do is to keep you safe and happy. Sometimes Sometimes families look different than other families. That doesn't make ours any less special, okay? Tommy nodded slowly, but she could see the questions in his eyes. The same questions he'd been asking with increasing frequency over the past year. Where's my dad? Why don't I have a dad? Did he not want me? Each question was a knife to her heart because the truth was so much more complicated than a 7-year-old could understand. Tell you what, Elizabeth said, making a decision. You can turn in this drawing. It's creative and beautiful. But promise me something. If anyone asks about it, if anyone seems too interested in the picture, you tell me immediately. Can you do that? Sure, Mom. Tommy stuffed the drawing back in his backpack and returned to his pancakes, the crisis already forgotten in his child's mind. But Elizabeth couldn't forget. A man watching the diner, a black car, someone who looked like Tommy, which meant someone who looked like him. After 7 years of running, 7 years of hiding, 7 years of carefully constructed invisibility, had he found them? The rest of the morning passed in a blur of automatic movements. Elizabeth took orders, delivered food, refilled coffee, and smiled at customers, all while her mind raced through possibilities and contingencies. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe Tommy had seen a random businessman who happened to park near the diner. Maybe her paranoia was finally getting the better of her. But maybe not. At 8:15, Elizabeth walked Tommy to school, holding his hand tightly as they navigated the 2 blocks of cracked sidewalks and modest houses. Millbrook Elementary was a squat brick building with a tired playground, but it had good teachers and a strong sense of community. Tommy had friends here, felt safe here. Have a good day, baby, Elizabeth said, kissing the top of his head. I'll pick you up at 3, okay? Okay, Mom. Love you. Love you more. She watched him disappear through the school doors, then stood there for another moment scanning the street for black sedans, for watching eyes, for any sign that her worst fears were coming true. Nothing obvious presented itself, but that meant nothing. These people were professionals. They knew how to watch without being seen. Elizabeth returned to the diner for the lunch shift, her nerves stretched thin. Rosie herself came in around noon, a woman in her 70s who'd owned the diner for 40 years and had seen everything Millbrook had to offer, both good and bad. You look tired, honey, Rosie observed, her weathered face creased with concern. You taking your breaks? I'm fine, Rosie. Just didn't sleep well. Rosie studied her with sharp eyes that missed very little. If something's wrong, you know you can tell me. This town can be complicated, but I know people who can help. That was Rosie's way of saying she had connections with the family. Most longtime business owners in Millbrook did. It was the price of operating in the neighborhood. Pay your tribute, play by the rules, and you were protected. Cause problems, and the protection disappeared. Really, I'm okay, Elizabeth insisted. Just one of those weeks. Rosie didn't look convinced but didn't push. All right, but the offer stands. Don't carry everything alone, Elizabeth. That's no way to live. The lunch rush provided a welcome distraction. Elizabeth threw herself into the work, grateful for the mindless routine. But at 1:30, the bell above the door chimed, and Marco walked in. He chose the same booth as that morning, near the window. This time he had a newspaper and seemed perfectly content to sit and read while he waited for service. There was nothing threatening in his demeanor, nothing overtly suspicious. To any observer, he was just another customer. But Elizabeth knew better. She approached the booth with her order pad, her expression professionally neutral. What can I get you? Cheeseburger, medium rare, fries, and a Coke. Marco glanced up from his newspaper, that same polite smile in place. You have a kid? Elizabeth's blood ran cold. Excuse me? Saw you walking with a little boy this morning? Your son? This was it. The moment she'd been dreading for 7 years. The moment when the questions started, when the walls she'd built began to crumble. She could lie, but he clearly already knew. She could run, but where would they go with no money and no preparation? Yes, she said simply. My son. Cute kid. How old? 7. The word felt like an admission, a surrender. Marco nodded, returning to his newspaper as if they'd been discussing the weather. Must be hard, raising a kid on a waitress salary. This economy, you know. Everything costs more and wages stay the same. We manage. I'm sure you do. You seem like a smart woman, resourceful. He looked up again, and this time his expression was more serious. But if you ever needed help, extra work maybe or protection, there are people in this town who take care of their own. Just something to think about. Elizabeth's hand tightened on her order pad. This was the recruitment pitch, or the warning, or both. I appreciate that, but we're fine. I'll get your order in. She retreated to the kitchen, her hands shaking as she clipped the order to the wheel. Through the window she could see Marco had returned to his newspaper, completely relaxed. He stayed for 45 minutes, ate his burger slowly, left another generous tip, and departed without further conversation. But the message had been delivered. We know about you. We know about your son. We're watching. Elizabeth picked up Tommy from school at 3 o'clock sharp, searching his face for any sign of trouble. How was your day? Did you turn in your picture? Yeah, Mrs. Patterson really liked it. She said it was very creative and asked me lots of questions about it. Elizabeth's stomach dropped. What kind of questions? Like, where did I see the man I drew, and did I know him, and stuff like that. I told her I just made him up, that I imagined what my dad might look like. She seemed really interested. Baby, did she say anything else? Did she seem worried? Tommy thought about it, swinging their joined hands as they walked. Not worried, just curious, I guess. She asked if I was happy at home and if everything was okay. I said yes. Was that right? That's perfect, sweetheart. You told her the truth. Elizabeth forced herself to breathe evenly, to not let her fear infect him. But her mind was racing. Teachers were mandatory reporters. If Mrs. Patterson thought Tommy was in any kind of danger, if the drawing had raised red flags, they reached their apartment building, a tired 3-story walk-up with peeling paint and a broken intercom. Home. Elizabeth unlocked the front door, and they climbed to the 2nd floor. Tommy chattering about his day, about a game he played at recess, about a book his teacher read to the class. Elizabeth unlocked their apartment door, and everything stopped. The apartment looked normal. Nothing was obviously disturbed. But Elizabeth had survived 7 years by trusting her instincts, and every instinct was screaming that something was wrong. Tommy, wait in the hallway for just a second, okay? I need to check something. Why? Just do it, please. She stepped inside cautiously, her eyes scanning every surface. The living room looked untouched. Their worn couch, Tommy's toys in their designated corner, the small TV on its wobbly stand. The kitchen was as she'd left it that morning, still smelling faintly of the toast she'd burned. But in the bedroom, their bedroom, the only bedroom in the tiny 2-bedroom apartment, something was different. On the dresser, carefully placed where she couldn't miss it, was Tommy's birth certificate. Elizabeth kept all their important documents in a locked box under her bed. She knew without checking that the box would be undisturbed, still locked. Whoever had been here had picked the lock, removed a single document, made their point, and left everything else exactly as it was. The birth certificate was 7 years old, the paper slightly yellowed. Elizabeth picked it up with trembling hands. Someone had used a yellow highlighter to mark one specific line. She stood there, staring at that highlighted emptiness, and felt the full weight of 7 years of secrets pressing down on her. The blank line wasn't an accident. The night Tommy was born in a hospital 3 states away, Elizabeth had left the father's name blank intentionally. Legally, her son had no father. Officially, he didn't exist in Tommy's life, but biology couldn't be erased with blank forms. And someone who could pick locks and enter apartments undetected, wanted her to know they understood exactly what that blank line meant. Mom, can I come in now? Tommy's voice from the hallway. Elizabeth quickly shoved the birth certificate into her pocket and forced her expression into something approaching normal. Yeah, baby, come on in. Sorry, I thought I heard a weird sound, but everything's fine. Tommy bounced into the apartment, already heading for his toys, resilient and trusting in the way only children could be. Elizabeth watched him, her heart breaking and her mind racing through impossible calculations. Run? With what money? To where? They had maybe $800 in savings. Not enough to start over, especially not with the kind of people who were clearly watching them. Go to the police? And say what? That she'd been found by people from her past? The police in Millbrook were paid to look the other way. She'd be signing their death warrant. Fight? She was a single mother with no resources, no connections, no protection. That left only one option. Wait. See what they wanted. Try to negotiate some kind of arrangement where Tommy stayed safe. Elizabeth made dinner, spaghetti, Tommy's favorite, and they ate together at their small table. Tommy talking about his day while Elizabeth nodded and smiled and tried to ignore the terror clawing at her chest. After dinner, she helped him with homework, gave him his bath, read him his bedtime story. Mom, Tommy said sleepily as she was tucking him in, Are you sure everything's okay? You seem sad. Elizabeth smoothed his hair back from his forehead, memorizing every detail of his face. I'm not sad, baby, I'm just tired. But as long as I have you, everything's perfect. I love you, Mom. I love you more than anything in the world. After Tommy fell asleep, Elizabeth sat at their kitchen table, the birth certificate in front of her, a cup of cooling tea forgotten at her elbow. She allowed herself, for the first time in years, to think about him, Vincent. She'd been 23 when they met, young and naive despite thinking herself worldly. She'd been working at an upscale restaurant in Atlantic City, saving money for nursing school, dreaming of a stable life. He'd been magnetic, dangerous in a way that felt exciting rather than threatening, at least at first. Rich, powerful, attentive in a way no man had ever been before. For 3 months, it was intense and consuming. He never told her exactly what he did, but she wasn't stupid. The bodyguards, the whispered conversations, the way people stepped aside when he entered a room, she knew he wasn't in legitimate business. But by the time she fully understood what his world actually meant, she was already in love and pregnant. The night she left, she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to see. Not violence. Vincent had been careful to keep that from her. But the aftermath. A meeting that went wrong. People who would do anything to maintain power. The cold calculation in discussing how to handle problems. And she realized, if she stayed, her child would grow up in that world. Her son would be born into violence and secrets and constant danger. He might follow in his father's footsteps, or he might become leverage against him, or he might simply be collateral damage in a war she didn't understand. So she ran. She withdrew every dollar from the account Vincent had opened for her, bought a bus ticket to Pittsburgh, and disappeared. For the first few months she jumped at every shadow, certain he would find her. But as time passed and nothing happened, she began to believe she'd succeeded. Maybe he hadn't looked for her. Maybe she'd been just another girlfriend, easily forgotten. Maybe he'd been relieved she was gone, one less liability in his complicated life. Or maybe he'd been looking all along, and had only now succeeded in finding her. Elizabeth was startled from her thoughts by a sound. Soft, barely perceptible. Something sliding under her apartment door. She approached slowly, half expecting danger, but it was just an envelope, unmarked and sealed. She picked it up with shaking hands and opened it. Inside was a single photograph, old and slightly faded. Elizabeth and Vincent 8 years ago at a beach she barely remembered. She was laughing, her head thrown back, his arm around her waist. They looked impossibly young, impossibly happy. She flipped the photograph over. On the back, in handwriting she recognized immediately. Strong, decisive strokes was a single word. Elizabeth stood in her tiny kitchen, holding a photograph of a life she'd tried to forget, and realized with terrible clarity that invisibility was no longer an option. 7 years of running had come to an end. Now she would have to face the truth she'd been hiding from, not just from Vincent, but from herself and from Tommy. The question wasn't whether he would come. The question was what would happen when he did. Vincent Marchetti hadn't set foot in this neighborhood in 8 years. He'd built an empire, eliminated competition through strategy and influence, and buried his past under layers of business deals and calculated moves. But the past has a way of digging itself up, especially when it has your eyes. Vincent Marchetti's day began, as it always did, at 5 in the morning. His penthouse apartment overlooked the Hudson River, 42 stories above the chaos of New York City. From here, the world looked ordered, controllable, a grid of lights and steel that bent to the will of those powerful enough to shape it. Vincent had spent 15 years making himself into one of those people. 15 years building something that couldn't be taken from him, or so he'd thought. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, espresso in hand, watching the sun rise over the city. At 36, Vincent Marchetti was at the peak of his influence. The Marchetti family controlled shipping operations from Baltimore to Boston, had legitimate business interests in construction and real estate, and maintained the kind of political connections that made problems disappear before they became headlines. He'd worked for this, fought for it, made choices that kept him awake some nights, staring at ceilings and wondering if power was worth its price. His phone buzzed. A text from Marco, his most trusted lieutenant. Need to talk. Important. Vincent checked his watch. 5:15. Marco knew better than to use important casually. He typed back, my office, 6 o'clock. The next 45 minutes passed in their usual routine. Workout in the private gym, Maintaining strength was maintaining respect. Shower, then the careful selection of his suit. Vincent preferred dark grays and navy blues. Well-tailored but not flashy. He'd learned early that real power didn't need to announce itself. By 6 o'clock he was in his office in Lower Manhattan, a legitimate investment firm that handled the family's legal operations and provided cover for everything else. Marco was already waiting, standing by the window, his expression troubled. "Talk," Vincent said, settling behind his desk. Marco hesitated, which was unusual. In their line of work, hesitation meant uncertainty, and uncertainty meant vulnerability. "It's about the Millbrook operation, the laundering route through the trucking companies." "What about it?" "It's clean, no problems, but I've been doing the routine check-ins, making sure all the local businesses are comfortable with the arrangement." Marco paused. "There's a diner, Rosie's. Been there for years, never an issue, but I noticed something." Vincent waited. Marco didn't waste time on irrelevant details. "There's a waitress, Elizabeth Torres, been working there about 6 years. Keeps to herself, doesn't cause problems, but something felt off, so I did some digging." Marco pulled out a folder, setting it on Vincent's desk. "She appeared in Millbrook 7 years ago. No history before that, no previous employment records, no credit history, nothing. It's like she didn't exist before she showed up in that town." "Witness protection?" Vincent asked, though his instincts told him it was something else. "That was my first thought, but no flags in the system. I think she's just running from something, or someone." Marco opened the folder, revealing a surveillance photo. A woman in a diner uniform, dark hair pulled back, caught in profile as she poured coffee. "Thought you should know we have someone operating under a false identity in our territory. Could be law enforcement, could be a plant from the Calabrese family, could be nothing." Vincent picked up the photo, and the world tilted. He knew that face. Even in profile, even after 8 years, even with the exhaustion evident in every line of her posture, he knew her. Elizabeth. His hand tightened on the photograph, but he kept his expression neutral. "What else?" "She has a kid, 7-year-old boy. No father listed on the birth certificate. She's struggling financially, living in a tiny apartment, working double shifts, barely making ends meet." Marco paused. "You want me to dig deeper? Maybe have a conversation with her, find out what she's running from?" Vincent's mind was racing through calculations and memories. 8 years ago, Elizabeth had left without explanation. He'd woken up one morning to find her gone. Clothes, money, everything. Just a note that said, "I'm sorry, this is for the best." He'd looked for her, spent months tracking credit cards, phone records, any digital footprint. But Elizabeth Chen, her real name he now realized might not have been Chen at all, had vanished completely. Eventually he'd forced himself to let it go, to bury that failure under the weight of everything else demanding his attention. But she'd been 40 minutes away the entire time. And she had a 7-year-old son. Vincent did the math automatically. 7 years old, conceived 8 years ago. The timeline fit perfectly. "Boss?" Marco's voice pulled him back to the present. "You okay?" Vincent set down the photograph carefully, his expression controlled. "I'll handle this one personally. Give me the address, the diner, her apartment, everything you have." Marco's eyes widened slightly. Vincent rarely involved himself in routine matters anymore. But he knew better than to question. "Sure, I'll send you the file. You want backup?" "No, this is delicate. I'll assess the situation myself." Vincent stood, signaling the meeting was over. "Good work, Marco. Keep this quiet. Nobody else needs to know about her yet." "Understood." After Marco left, Vincent stood alone in his office, staring at the photograph. Elizabeth, tired and worn but still beautiful, frozen in a moment of ordinary life, pouring coffee, surviving, hiding. He should have been angry. She'd left without explanation, disappeared without giving him a chance to fix whatever was wrong. She'd taken his choices away, made decisions for both of them. But underneath the anger was something more complicated. Relief that she was alive, curiosity about why she'd run, and a growing, terrible suspicion about the 7-year-old boy with no father on his birth certificate. Vincent picked up his phone and called his driver. "Bring the car around, we're going to Millbrook." It was time to find out what Elizabeth had been hiding. Rosie's diner looked exactly like the kind of place Vincent had grown up around. Worn but clean, honest food for working people, the backbone of a neighborhood. He sat in his car across the street for 10 minutes, watching through the large front windows. There she was, Elizabeth moved through the morning rush with practiced efficiency, balancing plates, refilling coffee, smiling at customers. She looked older. Life had added lines around her eyes, a wariness to her posture that hadn't been there before. But she was still her, still the woman who'd made him laugh, who'd challenged his assumptions, who'd seen past the reputation to the person underneath, the woman who'd left without saying goodbye. Vincent got out of the car. 2 of his men started to follow, but he waved them back. This required a different approach. Not the boss making an entrance, but a man seeking answers. The bell chimed as he opened the door. Several customers glanced up, then quickly away, the instinctive reaction people had to recognizing power they didn't want to engage with. Vincent chose a booth in Elizabeth's section and waited. He saw the exact moment she noticed him. She'd been reaching for a coffee pot and she froze, just for a second, barely noticeable to anyone else. But Vincent had spent years reading people, interpreting micro-expressions, seeing what people tried to hide. Elizabeth was terrified. She finished pouring coffee for another customer, set the pot down carefully and approached his booth. Her face was composed, but he could see her pulse racing in her throat. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice steady despite everything. "Coffee, black." Vincent kept his tone neutral, giving her nothing to react to. "And a few minutes of your time, when you have a break." "I don't take breaks during the morning rush. Then after, I can wait." Elizabeth's jaw tightened. "I don't think—" Elizabeth, just her name spoken quietly. Not a threat, not a command. A reminder that they had history, that running hadn't erased what they'd been to each other. She glanced around the diner, checking for exits, calculating options, a hunted animal assessing escape routes. Then she nodded once sharply. "After the rush, 1 o'clock. There's a park 2 blocks from here. I'll be there." She brought him coffee, set it down without meeting his eyes, and retreated to the safety of the kitchen. Vincent watched her disappear, then turned his attention to the diner itself. Nothing remarkable. Just people living their lives, eating breakfast, reading newspapers, existing in the comfortable anonymity of routine. Then the door opened, and a small boy came in. Vincent knew immediately. Some recognitions are instantaneous, bypassing logic to strike directly at instinct. The boy was 7 years old, dark-haired with a lean build that would probably become tall and broad-shouldered. But it was his eyes, gray-green, unusual and distinctive, that stopped Vincent's breath. Those were his eyes. His father's eyes. His grandfather's eyes. A genetic marker that ran through 4 generations of Marsetti men. The boy climbed onto a stool at the counter, swinging his legs, and Elizabeth appeared from the kitchen with a plate of pancakes. The tenderness in her expression, the way she smoothed the boy's hair, the soft conversation between them, it was so clearly mother and son that anyone watching would have seen it. But Vincent saw more. He saw the protective way Elizabeth positioned herself between the boy and the rest of the diner, the way her eyes constantly scanned the room, checking for threats, the worn but clean clothes that spoke of careful budgeting, the small tender gestures of a mother doing everything possible to keep her child safe, his son. The certainty settled into Vincent's bones. This wasn't suspicion or hope or fear. This was knowledge. The timeline fit. The physical resemblance was undeniable, and Elizabeth's reaction to seeing him confirmed it. For 7 years he'd had a son, and he'd known nothing about it. Vincent sat frozen in his booth, coffee growing cold, watching Elizabeth and the boy, his son, interact with the casual intimacy of their daily routine. Emotions he'd spent years suppressing crashed through his careful control. Anger at Elizabeth for keeping this from him. Grief for the 7 years he'd missed. Fear about what this meant for the boy's safety. And underneath it all, something primal and unexpected. Joy. He had a son. The boy finished his pancakes, and Elizabeth walked him out of the diner holding his hand. Through the window, Vincent watched them head down the sidewalk, Elizabeth constantly alert, the boy chattering and carefree. She was taking him to school, Vincent realized. Their routine. He pulled out his phone and texted Marco. "The kid. I need everything. School records, medical history, everything. Don't approach, just gather intel." Marco's response was immediate. On it. Vincent waited in the diner until Elizabeth returned. She saw him still sitting there and her expression tightened, but she couldn't avoid him, not without causing a scene. And clearly she'd spent 7 years avoiding scenes. 1 o'clock, she said quietly as she passed his booth. "The park. Not here." Agreed. She moved away to help other customers, and Vincent left cash on the table, far more than necessary for a cup of coffee he'd barely touched. As he walked back to his car, his mind was already working through the implications. A son meant vulnerability. In Vincent's world, family was both strength and weakness. His enemies, and he had many, would see the boy as leverage, a pressure point to exploit. The Calabrese family in particular had been pushing into Marchetti territory for months, testing boundaries, looking for weaknesses. If they found out about the boy, Vincent's hands clenched. He'd spent 15 years building his position through strategy and reputation. He'd avoided unnecessary conflict, eliminated threats before they grew dangerous, maintained respect through measured responses. But this was different. This was his son. He would protect the boy. The question was how to do it without putting him in more danger. Lincoln Park was a small green space with worn playground equipment and a few benches overlooking a pond where ducks congregated. At 1 o'clock, Vincent sat on a bench at the far end, away from the mothers with their toddlers and the elderly couple feeding the ducks. Elizabeth arrived exactly on time, still in her diner uniform. She sat on the opposite end of the bench, maintaining distance, her body language screaming discomfort and fear. For a long moment, neither spoke. 8 years of silence sat between them, heavy and complicated. His name? Vincent asked finally. Elizabeth's breath caught. So she'd hoped even now to avoid the truth. Vincent. His name. Tommy. Her voice was barely audible. Thomas James Torres. Torres. Your real last name? Yes. Not Chen, like you told me. Elizabeth's jaw tightened. I told you a lot of things that weren't true. You of all people should understand protecting yourself with lies. It was a fair point. Vincent had never told her the full truth about his business either. They'd built their relationship on mutual attraction and carefully curated half-truths, two people enjoying each other while maintaining strategic distance, until she'd gotten pregnant. Why didn't you tell me? Vincent asked, and was surprised to hear genuine pain in his voice, an emotion he'd trained himself not to show. I had a right to know. Did you? Elizabeth turned to face him fully for the first time, and he saw the exhaustion etched into her features. 8 years of struggle, of working double shifts, of raising a child alone. Would knowing have made anything better, Vincent? Would you have left your life, your family's business, your world? You didn't give me the choice. I gave my son a choice. Elizabeth's voice rose, then dropped to a harsh whisper. A choice to grow up normal, safe, away from everything you are, everything I am. Vincent tested the words, tasted the bitterness. And what am I, Elizabeth? You know what you are. She looked away toward the pond. That night, the last night before I left. You remember? You had that meeting that ran late. I waited at your apartment. And when you came home, something had happened. I saw it in your face. You wouldn't tell me what, but I saw the calculation, the coldness, and I realized that whatever you'd done, whoever you'd hurt, it was just business to you, just another problem solved. Vincent did remember. A situation with a rival operator who'd been skimming profits and threatening to go to the authorities. Vincent had solved it, through leverage and carefully applied pressure, not violence. But Elizabeth was right that he'd come home different that night, the mask slipping enough for her to see what lay beneath. I never hurt you, he said. No, you didn't, but you would have hurt our son. Just by existing in his life, he would have grown up around your world, your business, your enemies. He would have been a target or a successor or collateral damage. Elizabeth's hands twisted in her lap. I couldn't let that happen, so I took the money you'd given me, and I ran. For 7 years, 40 minutes away. I kept moving at first. Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Philadelphia. But every time I moved, I had less money, fewer resources, and Tommy needed stability. So I found Millbrook. Small, quiet, the kind of place where nobody asks too many questions. I thought I'd finally gotten far enough away. There is no far enough away from me, Vincent said quietly. If I'd known to look, I would have found you years ago. I know. That's why I tried so hard to disappear. Elizabeth finally met his eyes and he saw tears threatening. Vincent, please. I know you have every right to be angry. I know I took something from you, but Tommy is happy. He's safe. He has friends and a good school and a life that doesn't involve bodyguards and threats and looking over his shoulder. Don't take that from him. He asks about me. Vincent didn't phrase it as a question. Elizabeth's expression confirmed it. Constantly, especially this year. He wants to know why he doesn't have a father like other kids. He draws pictures of what he thinks you might look like. Her voice broke. He saw you yesterday, outside the diner, and he told me you looked like him. Same eyes. Vincent absorbed this. His son knew he existed, at least in theory. Wanted a father. Drew pictures imagining what Vincent might look like. I want to meet him, Vincent said. Properly, not just watching through a diner window. No. Elizabeth's response was immediate and fierce. Absolutely not. He's my son. He's my son. I've raised him, protected him, sacrificed everything for him. You don't get to just walk in and what? Be his father? That's exactly what I get to do, Elizabeth. Vincent's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. I understand why you ran. I even understand why you didn't tell me. But now I know. And you can't ask me to walk away from my own child. Your world will destroy him. My world already surrounds him. Vincent leaned forward, intensity breaking through his controlled exterior. You chose Millbrook because it was quiet and small. But do you know who controls Millbrook? Who takes a percentage of every business in that town? Whose permission Rosie needs to operate her diner? Elizabeth's face paled. Me, Vincent confirmed. The Marchetti family. You've been living under my protection this whole time without knowing it. And you've been lucky. We run clean operations in the suburbs. Keep the peace. Let people live their lives. But there are others who don't operate that way. The Calabrese family has been expanding, taking territory, not caring who gets hurt. If they find out about Tommy, if they realize he's leverage against me, what do you think happens? They don't know about him. Nobody does. Marco knows, which means soon others will know. Information spreads, Elizabeth. You can't keep secrets in this life. I learned that lesson years ago. Vincent paused, letting the reality sink in. You have two choices. You can keep pretending Tommy is safe in your bubble, and eventually something will happen that proves you wrong. Or you can let me protect him, really protect him, with the resources I have. At what cost? He becomes one of you. He becomes my son, protected, provided for, safe. Vincent gentled his voice. I'm not asking to take him away from you. I'm not asking to change his life. I just want to be part of it. To know him. To make sure he's protected from the things you can't protect him from. Elizabeth was crying now, silent tears running down her cheeks. If you do this, if you enter his life, there's no going back. He'll know who you are, what you are. That innocence I've tried so hard to preserve is already gone, Vincent said, not unkindly. He's asking questions you can't answer, drawing pictures of a father he's never met, living with a mother who's exhausted from trying to do everything alone. Maybe innocence isn't what he needs anymore. Maybe he needs the truth. For a long moment, Elizabeth sat silent, staring at her hands. Vincent waited, recognizing that this moment would define everything that followed. He could force the issue, legally, financially. He had power she couldn't match, but he didn't want to break her. Despite everything, he'd cared for her once, maybe still did, in the complicated way people carry their past. One meeting, Elizabeth said finally. You can meet him. As a friend. Someone who knew me from before. But if at any point I think you're putting him in danger, or trying to influence him toward your world, or treating him like some kind of heir to your business, I disappear again. And this time, you won't find us. It wasn't trust, but it was a start. Agreed, Vincent said. When? Tomorrow, after school. I'll bring him to the park. 3:30. Elizabeth stood, wiping her eyes. And Vincent, he's a good kid. Sweet, curious, smart. He deserves better than both of us. She walked away before Vincent could respond, leaving him alone on the bench with 8 years of missed moments and a future that suddenly felt far more complicated than any business deal he'd ever negotiated. His son. Tomorrow he'd meet his son. Vincent pulled out his phone and called his head of security. I need a full security sweep on Millbrook Elementary School. Cameras, patrol routes, vulnerabilities, and I want surveillance on the Calabrese family's operations. If they make any moves toward that town, I want to know immediately. If he was going to be a father, he'd do it right. And in his world, doing it right meant making sure his son was safe from every possible threat, even if that threat came from his own life's choices. That night, Vincent sat in his penthouse, staring at a folder Marco had delivered. School records, medical history, photographs, his son's life, reduced to documents. Tommy Torres, was a good student, B+ average with particular strength in math and reading. His teachers described him as enthusiastic and kind to other students. No disciplinary issues. Perfect attendance except for one bout of flu last winter. The medical records showed a healthy child. Vaccinations on schedule. No chronic conditions. A broken arm from a playground accident 2 years ago. Vincent lingered on that entry, imagining his son falling, crying, going to the hospital without a father to comfort him. 7 years of scraped knees and school plays and birthday parties. 7 years of first words and first steps and first everything. Gone. He'd never get them back. But tomorrow he'd start building new memories. Vincent's phone buzzed, a text from Marco. "We have a problem. Calabrese family was spotted near Millbrook Elementary today. Might be routine, but thought you should know." Vincent's blood ran cold. He immediately called Marco. "Details now. One of their junior guys, Angelo Rizzo, was seen driving past the school 3 times between 2 and 3 p.m. Could be nothing. Could be surveillance for a different reason, but given the timing, put a full team on it. I want to know everywhere Rizzo goes, everyone he talks to. And I want security watching the school. Discreet, but effective. Already handled. But boss, if Calabrese knows about the kid, they don't. They can't." But even as Vincent said it, he knew it was wishful thinking. Information leaked. People talked. And he just had a very public meeting with Elizabeth in a neighborhood park. If anyone had been watching. Vincent ended the call and stood at his window looking out over the city. Somewhere out there, his son was sleeping, unaware that his life was about to change forever, unaware that simply being Vincent Marsetti's child made him valuable and vulnerable. Tomorrow, Vincent would meet Tommy. He'd smile, answer questions, try to be the father his son had been imagining. But underneath, he'd be calculating threats, assessing vulnerabilities, planning protection, because that's what fathers did in his world. They loved their children by keeping them alive. The next afternoon, Vincent arrived at Lincoln Park at 3:15, dressed casually in jeans and a button-down shirt, as close to normal as his wardrobe allowed. His security team was scattered around the perimeter, invisible to casual observation, but ready if needed. At 3:30 exactly, Elizabeth appeared, holding Tommy's hand. Vincent's heart, an organ he'd trained to remain steady through negotiations and threats and pressure, stuttered. His son, walking toward him, real and solid and alive. Tommy was chattering about something, his free hand gesturing animatedly while Elizabeth listened with patient attention. When she pointed toward Vincent, Tommy looked up, curiosity bright in those distinctive gray-green eyes. They approached the bench where Vincent sat. He stood, suddenly uncertain, an unfamiliar feeling for a man who'd built his life on confidence and control. "Tommy, this is Vincent. He's an old friend of mine from before you were born." Elizabeth's voice was steady, but Vincent could see the tension in her shoulders. "Vincent, this is my son, Tommy." "Hi," Tommy said brightly, no shyness in his demeanor. "Mom said you wanted to meet me." "Why?" Direct. Vincent appreciated that. "Because your mom was important to me a long time ago and I wanted to see how she was doing. And she talks about you a lot, so I was curious to meet you." "Really? What does she say?" Vincent glanced at Elizabeth, who gave a tiny shrug. "Your call. She says you're smart and kind and that you ask a lot of questions." "I do ask questions." Tommy grinned. "My teacher says I'm curious. Is that bad?" "Not at all. Curious people learn things. That's good." Vincent gestured to the bench. "Want to sit? Maybe you can tell me about school or what you like to do." Tommy climbed onto the bench enthusiastically, Elizabeth sitting beside him, her body language protective but allowing the interaction. Vincent took the opposite end, maintaining respectful distance. "I like math," Tommy offered, "and reading. And at recess we play soccer, but I'm not very good. I'm better at drawing." "What do you like to draw?" "Everything. Buildings and cars and people. Yesterday I drew a picture of my family for school." Tommy's expression became more thoughtful. "But it was kind of hard because it's just me and Mom. Other kids have dads and brothers and sisters. So I had to imagine what my family might look like if it was bigger." Vincent felt Elizabeth tense beside her son. "What did you imagine?" he asked carefully. "I drew a dad, but I don't really know what he looks like, so I just made him look strong and nice. Mom says my dad isn't around, but she doesn't say why. Do you know why dads sometimes aren't around?" The question was innocent, without accusation, but it struck Vincent like a physical blow. Here was his son, imagining a father, wondering why he didn't have one, and the answer was sitting right in front of him. "Sometimes," Vincent said slowly, choosing his words with care, People can't be together even when they want to be. Maybe they live too far apart, or their lives are too different, or they think being apart is safer for everyone. But that doesn't mean the dad doesn't care. Sometimes caring means making hard choices. Tommy considered this with the serious expression of a child trying to understand adult complexities. Is that what happened with my dad? He made a hard choice? Your mom made a hard choice, Vincent corrected gently. To keep you safe. That's what good parents do. They protect their kids even when it's difficult. Yeah, Mom's really good at protecting me. Tommy leaned against Elizabeth, casual and trusting. She works a lot so we can have our apartment and food and stuff. And she always makes sure I do my homework and eat vegetables even though I don't like them. And she reads to me every night, even when she's tired. Vincent looked at Elizabeth, saw the love and exhaustion and fierce dedication in her face. For 7 years, she'd done everything alone. Everything he should have been sharing. Your mom sounds amazing, Vincent said. She is. Tommy's agreement was absolute. Then with a child's quicksilver change of subject, do you have any kids? The question hung in the air. Elizabeth went very still. Vincent met her eyes, saw the warning there. Don't. Not yet. Too soon. I do, Vincent said carefully. I have a son. He's 7 years old, actually. Same age as you. Really? Does he go to my school? No, he lives somewhere else. But I think about him a lot. Wonder what he's doing. If he's happy. If he's safe. Being a dad is complicated when you can't be there every day. That's sad, Tommy said with simple empathy. I bet your son wonders about you too. I wonder about my dad all the time. Like, does he think about me? Does he know about me? Would he like me if he met me? Vincent's throat tightened. I'm sure he would. You seem like a great kid. Thanks. Tommy grinned, then noticed something across the park. Oh, Mom, can I go on the swings just for a little bit? Elizabeth hesitated, clearly not wanting to leave Vincent alone with Tommy, but also not wanting to deny him. Stay where I can see you, and be careful. I will. Tommy jumped off the bench and ran toward the playground, all 7-year-old energy and enthusiasm. As soon as he was out of earshot, Elizabeth turned to Vincent. Thank you. For being careful with what you said. He's a good kid, Vincent said, watching Tommy climb onto a swing. You did well raising him alone. I didn't have a choice. No, I suppose you didn't. Vincent paused. But now you do. Let me help Elizabeth. Not by taking over, not by changing everything. Just by being present, by making sure you both have what you need. I don't want your money. It's not about the money. It's about giving him opportunities, security, a future that's better than scraping by. Vincent turned to face her fully. And it's about him having a father who knows he exists and wants to be part of his life. Before Elizabeth could respond, Vincent's phone vibrated, a specific pattern that meant urgent security alert. He checked it quickly, his expression darkening. What? Elizabeth asked, alarm in her voice. Marco just sent surveillance photos. The Calabrese family has been watching the school. And the diner. They know something. Vincent's mind raced through implications and responses. We need to move up our timeline. Timeline for what? For protecting Tommy. If Calabrese realizes he's my son, and they will soon, he becomes a target. We need to increase security, maybe move you both somewhere safer. No. Elizabeth stood, her voice rising. No, you don't get to come in here and upend our lives. We're fine. We've been fine for 7 years. Mom? Tommy's voice, uncertain, from the playground. He'd noticed the raised voices, the tension. Elizabeth immediately smoothed her expression, waving to Tommy that everything was okay. But when she turned back to Vincent, her eyes were blazing. This is exactly what I was afraid of. You bring your world and suddenly we're in danger. We were invisible before you found us. You were never invisible, Vincent said quietly. You were just lucky, and luck runs out. Then we'll move again, disappear again. They'll find you. If I found you, they can too. And if you're not under my protection, Vincent let the implication hang in the air. Elizabeth wrapped her arms around herself, and for a moment, she looked exactly as she had 8 years ago. Young, vulnerable, caught between impossible choices. I hate this. I hate that you're right. I hate that trying to protect him means bringing him into the exact world I tried to escape. I know. Vincent stood, maintaining respectful distance. But running from the truth doesn't change it. Tommy is my son, and in my world that makes him both precious and vulnerable. I can work with that, keep him safe while letting him live a normal life. But you have to trust me. I don't trust you. Then trust that I love him. I've known him for 20 minutes and I already know I'd do anything to protect him. Imagine how much stronger that feeling will be as I get to know him. Vincent glanced toward Tommy, who was now hanging upside down from the monkey bars. He deserves both of his parents, Elizabeth. Fighting each other doesn't help him. Elizabeth was quiet for a long moment, watching their son play. Finally, she said, "What do you want to do?" "Tomorrow. We need to talk, really talk, about logistics and security and how to handle this. Tonight, I'm putting a protection detail on your apartment and the school. Discreet, professional. You won't even notice them. I don't want men in suits following my son around. They won't be obvious, but they'll be there. Because the alternative is hoping Calabrese doesn't make a move, and hope isn't a strategy." Vincent softened his tone. "Please, let me do this much." After a long pause, Elizabeth nodded once. "Okay, but we do this my way. Tommy doesn't know who you are. Not yet. We take it slow. Let him get to know you naturally, not as some big revelation." "Agreed." Tommy ran back over, breathless and happy. "That was fun. Can we come back tomorrow?" "Maybe," Elizabeth said, managing a smile. "We'll see." "Nice to meet you, Tommy," Vincent said, offering his hand. Tommy shook it solemnly, and Vincent felt the small, warm grip, solid proof of a son he'd never known existed until 3 days ago. "You too, Mr. Vincent, are you going to be around? Maybe we can hang out again." "I'd like that." As Elizabeth and Tommy walked away, Vincent stood watching until they disappeared around the corner. Then he pulled out his phone and made a series of calls. Security detail, background checks on everyone in Elizabeth's building, surveillance upgrades, a careful investigation into exactly what Calabrese knew and what they were planning. Being a father in his world meant thinking 3 steps ahead, protecting against threats before they materialized, and being willing to do whatever was necessary to keep his child safe. He'd spent 15 years being Vincent Marchetti, the strategist, the businessman, the leader. Now he'd have to learn how to be something much more complicated, a father. That evening, Elizabeth and Tommy returned to their apartment to find everything exactly as they'd left it. But Elizabeth knew better. She could sense the presence of Vincent's protection. The car parked across the street with a clear view of their building, the subtle repositioning of security cameras, the feeling of being watched. She made dinner while Tommy did homework, both of them settling into their routine. But her mind was elsewhere, running through scenarios and consequences. Vincent in their lives meant safety, but it also meant complications. How long before Tommy figured out who Vincent really was? How would she explain that his father was, what, a businessman? A powerful man? A person who operated in moral gray zones? "Mom?" Tommy's voice from the table. "Do you think I'll see Mr. Vincent again?" "Maybe, baby. He's been thinking about us, checking in to make sure we're okay." "That's nice of him." Tommy returned to his homework, adding almost casually, "He has sad eyes, like he misses people." Elizabeth's heart clenched. 7 years old, and her son could read emotion with devastating accuracy. "Yeah," she said softly, "I think he does." After Tommy went to bed, Elizabeth sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, trying to process the day. 3 days ago, her life had been difficult but predictable. Now, everything had changed. There was a soft knock at the door, 3 taps, deliberate. Elizabeth approached cautiously, checked the peephole. A man in casual clothes stood in the hallway, professional and alert. One of Vincent's people. She opened the door. "Yes?" "Mrs. Torres, I'm James. I'll be monitoring the building tonight. Just wanted to introduce myself. You won't see me, but I'm here if you need anything." "I didn't ask for this." "No, ma'am. Mr. Marchetti did. He wants to make sure you and your son are safe." James paused. "For what it's worth, ma'am, I've worked for Mr. Marchetti for 8 years. He's a good man to have on your side. Fair, protective, doesn't forget loyalty. And what does he expect in return for this protection?" James considered the question seriously. "In this case, nothing, ma'am. This is about his son. Everything else is secondary." After James returned to his post, Elizabeth locked the door and leaned against it. Vincent's words echoed in her mind. You can't keep secrets in this life. She'd tried. For 7 years, she'd run from the truth. But truth had a way of catching up, whether you were ready or not. Tomorrow, she'd have to figure out how to navigate this new reality, how to protect Tommy while acknowledging that Vincent had a right to be in his life, how to balance safety with normalcy. But tonight, she just stood in her small apartment, listening to her son sleep, and wondered if she'd made the right choice coming to that park. If letting Vincent into their lives would save them or destroy them, only time would tell. Some secrets are kept out of love, others out of fear. Elizabeth had never figured out which category hers fell into, until now, when she had no choice but to face it. The call came at 2 in the morning. Elizabeth jolted awake to her phone, buzzing insistently. Vincent's name flashed on the screen. She'd saved his number after their park meeting, though she'd hoped never to use it. "What's wrong?" she whispered, not wanting to wake Tommy. "Get dressed. Pack essentials for you and Tommy. My men are outside. They'll take you somewhere safe." Vincent's voice was tight with controlled urgency. "Don't ask questions, just move now." "Vincent, you're scaring me." "Calabrese knows. They grabbed one of Rosie's nightstaff an hour ago. She talked. They know about Tommy, and they're coming for him." A pause heavy with implication. "They want leverage against me. Elizabeth, if they get to him..." The phone nearly slipped from her shaking hands. "How long do we have?" "Minutes. Maybe less. My security detail will protect you until you're clear, but we need to move fast." Elizabeth was already out of bed, pulling on jeans with one hand. "Where are we going?" "My penthouse. It's the safest place right now. Full security, controlled access. We'll figure out next steps once you're there." Vincent's tone softened slightly. "I know this isn't what you wanted, but right now it's the only option." Okay. I'm getting Tommy." She woke her son gently, whispering that they were going on an adventure, that everything was fine, but they needed to be quick and quiet. Tommy, still half asleep, nodded and stumbled into his clothes. 5 minutes later, they were in Vincent's car, speeding through empty streets while Tommy dozed against Elizabeth's shoulder. She stared out the window, watching their neighborhood, their life, disappear behind them. "I'm sorry," Vincent said from the driver's seat. "I tried to prevent this." "I know." And she did. This wasn't Vincent's fault. This was the inevitable consequence of his world colliding with hers. The question now was how to protect Tommy from the fallout, and whether telling him the truth about his father would save him or put him in even more danger. Vincent Marchetti had spent his life choosing between loyalty and survival, but now, for the first time, love entered the equation and changed everything. Dawn broke over Manhattan as Tommy woke in Vincent's penthouse, confused but curious. Elizabeth sat beside him on the leather couch, exhausted but alert. "Mom, where are we?" Tommy rubbed his eyes. "Why did we leave?" Before Elizabeth could answer, Vincent entered with breakfast. "You're at my place, Tommy. Your mom and I need to talk to you about something important." Tommy looked between them, and something clicked in his 7-year-old mind. "You're him, aren't you? You're my dad." The directness stunned them both. Elizabeth's breath caught. Vincent knelt to Tommy's eye level. "Yes," Vincent said simply. "I'm your father. I only found out about you a few days ago. Your mom kept you safe all these years by keeping you away from my complicated life." "Why is your life complicated?" "I work in a business where some people aren't very nice. They found out about you, and they wanted to use you to hurt me. That's why we left last night, to keep you safe." Tommy processed this with remarkable calm. "So you're protecting us now?" "Always. That's what fathers do." Vincent's voice was steady, certain. "And I have a plan to make sure you and your mom never have to run again." By noon, Vincent had made his choice. He called a meeting with both families, Marchetti and Calabrese. The deal was simple. He would transition his operations to fully legitimate businesses over the next year, stepping back from territory disputes. In exchange, his family, Elizabeth and Tommy, would be untouchable, off-limits, sacred. "You're giving up everything?" Elizabeth asked later, disbelief in her voice. "No," Vincent corrected, watching Tommy play with a tablet across the room. "I'm gaining everything that matters. Power means nothing if I can't protect my son." The Calabrese family accepted. Without Vincent's resistance, they could expand peacefully. And Vincent's reputation ensured they'd honor the agreement. Crossing him would be too costly. 3 months later, Elizabeth owned Rosie's Diner outright, purchased with Vincent's investment. Tommy knew his father, spent weekends at the penthouse, and was adjusting to having 2 parents instead of 1. In the park where they first reunited, Vincent taught Tommy to throw a football while Elizabeth watched, finally at peace. "Think he'll be okay?" Vincent asked, sitting beside her. "With both of us? He'll be better than okay." Elizabeth took his hand. "We'll all be." For the first time in 8 years, she believed it.